So welcome to everybody. Today we have our special guest, Anatoly Karlin, and we had already many streams with him, but today I wanted to have a little bit of, let's say, chit chat about some data. I prepared some slides, and Anatoly has some specific, let's say, focus on his forum and on his Telegram channel, Twitter, about plenty of things. So I updated the bio on the description of the channel. So go on his channel and subscribe to him. It's very interesting things, a little bit different about geopolitics. So I suggest you to subscribe his channel. Today we wanted to make like a fast stream, let's say 40 minutes maximum, about a little bit of information. First, we had like the updated results of the election in the Russian Federation. I wanted to put a little bit of, we were discussing before the live about the Levada Institute polls. This was like the last one, so we can discuss about the results of the election. We can see that the internal polls of approval of President Putin went up, mainly in connection of the war in Ukraine. We can see in the opposite that the approval, the disapproval of the government were in connection not in something that was connected with any wars, but it was with the pension reform. So it's interesting that like the internal approval of a president, it's not connected to the foreign politics, but more to, let's say, internal Russian politics. And with the same about the approval of the prime minister, we can see that it is the same. It was about 70%. And the third, let's say, polls about Levada Institute, that it's an independent poll institute in Russia, was about, do you approve the activities of Vladimir Putin as a president of Russia? And it was over 80%. We can see that the approval went up in the connection of the same time of the two phases of let's say, conflict in Ukraine. So 2014 about annexation of Crimea, and went down in 2017 when there was like the pension reform, and return up in February 2022. So Anatoly, just first question, what do you think about the results of the election in Russia? If there is any surprise about participation or percentage?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's great to be back on your show as usual, Stefano. Thank you. With respect to the elections, just a quick history lesson. Ever since Putin came to power, there's been a progressively increasing levels of fraud. I mean, they had their ups and downs, but generally speaking, it's been increasing. However, over the same period of time, Putin, even if the election had been fully free and fair, if there hadn't been fraud, more specifically, Putin would have been winning all of this time as well. And this describes the current election as well. I would estimate Putin's real result was probably in the low 70%, like 72% across Russia, 65% in Moscow, whereas the official results, as announced, were 87% across Russia and 86% in Moscow. Now, just on the face of it, 86% in Moscow, like Russia's opposition capital, is pretty absurd, and there will be more concrete evidence of this coming in the next few days, because you have statistical methods of detecting election fraud, but even just looking at the results across polling stations, like now across a London Moscow district, for instance, you have a series. What you typically have is a series of polling stations with results like 62, 65, 68, 70, 64, and so on. And then you have a bunch of polling stations with results like 90% for Putin, like sharply moved up, and a bunch of those with 99% actually. So this is just a telltale evidence of thought that would not be sort of would not occur if the elections were not falsified, as they were in Moscow after the Bolotnaya protests in 2011. They actually ceased engaging in falsifications in Moscow for a decade, but it seems that they've resumed them this time. And the level of thought, as I said, in across Russia as a whole, real result probably something like 70-73%, official result 87%, so plus 15 percentage points. Before that, it was more like plus 10 percentage points. So I think they've increased it even further. And it's not just like this looking at the results. It's also even if you look at the opinion polls, not approval ratings, but specifically polls asking people how they would vote. Even state-owned opinion pollsters such as VTOM and FOM, Fond Общественного мнения, they were giving 80% to Putin, and he got 87%. Even though in practice Putin typically underperforms his opinion polls because, like in actually unfalsified elections, because it's socially conventional and normal to say that you are voting for Putin. So that's my take on the Russian elections. Putin would have won legitimately. Well, I mean, to the extent that they can be considered legitimate, which they can't really, because a bunch of candidates were taken off the roster. Plus, obviously, Navalny was probably killed in the Siberian jail. But that aside, Putin would have won 73% without falsifications. He won with 87%. That's my brief take on it.
Let me show you this thing. It was about the polls before the election, and it's interesting because the average of the polls we can see also in this a little bit. Let's say synthesis. It's a little bit discordant with the results, the final results, because we can see that it was, let's say, about an average that could be 60%. So if the final results it's 87, it means that is 27 points more than expected. And
Okay, to be honest, this is not the correct approach, because if you look at your table carefully, you will see that there's an undecided column, people who have not decided. And some of those undecided people are going to be voting for Putin. So if you adjust for it, the typical sort of percentages that Putin was getting was 75%, 80%, and he got 87%. So it's not that extreme.
Yeah, but also let's say that the underperforming candidate, if we analyze these charts like Davankov, because all of the candidates were in less than 11%, 12%, all summed. So if we have Kharitonov, Slutsky, Davankov, all of them connected is less than 12%, because let's say 10%, because you have also blank and not valid votes. So it's this was however the gap to fill. So it was obviously the results also before the election. But what is your opinion? Because I wanted to share also some other data about the meaning of this, let's say, election, also in the connection of the actual situation of the war in Ukraine. About what could be for the next, let's say, scenario in the next month or year. It could be like some negotiation. There is maybe some push from both parts to analyze a situation that could be more like a Korean scenario. Because in the last days, I have a lot of rumors from many parts that are talking about a demilitarized zone, DMZ, between the two parts. And that could be, let's say, ceasefire and reallocation of actual position, also with the acceptance of the Ukrainian part of Donbass and Crimea under Russian Federation. What is your opinion about it? If I can be more precise, it's like is the internal legitimization of Putin after this presidential election make more possible any scenario of negotiation and ceasefire or less?
I mean, this is criminology at this point, and a lot of people are claiming to have insights of various kinds. There is evidence that some sort of, I mean, I'm familiar with the rumors of a peace deal as well. But there's also other speculations that Putin could lead the 87% result as a mandate to continue and intensify the war, do a second round of mobilization potentially, which I think is actually quite likely in view of the Russian army's extreme losses in taking Avdiivka. So I'm agnostic towards this.
Okay.
What I will more generally say is that my position since like literally January 2023 was that the likeliest long-term scenario is a stalemate. That's proven accurate to date. Now the main question is basically trends in manpower. So to continue fighting, the Ukrainians are speaking of mobilizing another 500,000 people. Those numbers are obviously ridiculous, but like 200,000, I mean, that's more realistic, and obviously a mobilization would have to become more coercive. Same really goes for Russia, because after, like, pretty much everybody is familiar with the Telegram videos of like the snuff videos from the drones and so on. So I think doing a second round of mobilization in Russia would be more difficult now as well, relative to the first one. Create a lot of social protest. The final thing I would sort of like mention, couple of things actually, as regards military trends, is that first, Russia's stocks of Soviet hardware, they're coming to an end. Like if you look at the tank losses, you see more and more T-62s, even T-55s appearing in those statistics, which suggests that the T-72s and T-80s are kind of petering out by this point. That's the first thing, and obviously with the Russia hasn't like the Russian military-industrial complex mostly withered away after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and as it emerged, it wasn't reconstituted under Putin. So I mean, it was modernized, but only to a very, very small extent. So if Russia was going to transition to a hardcore war economy, the time to do that would have been starting a couple of years ago. It hasn't really done that, apart from shells production, which are like the one major exception. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is that the drones are going to become more and more central, because unlike other platforms, how drones fundamentally differ is that they think that they can increasingly think for themselves through artificial intelligence. And another thing is that the outcome of the war will also very likely hinge on which side will be able to acquire a dominating lead in the drone race, if one of them does manage to do that.
Okay, I have a question like from the public. So There is no stalemate. None of what seems to be going on the front line seems to be indicating a stalemate, at least in my personal opinion. The question was, do you believe Belgorod attack affected the results of the election, percentage-wise, if not the outcome?
Maybe collapsed it by 1% or 2%, but I don't think it played any big role because like the people who support Putin and who support the hawks, they would not be affected, and people who oppose the war, I mean, they would sort of like laugh about this or commiserate about this on Telegram, but they would be against the war anyway. So it's like with Navalny, like with the murder of Navalny. People who support Putin, I mean, they wouldn't care, like in their majority, and liberals who were against Putin and for Navalny from the start, I mean, they already hate Putin. So again, no real difference. I would imagine. And yeah, I mean, it very obviously is a stalemate. I don't know where you sort of like get that idea from, because Russia spent 4 months taking a suburb of Donetsk, which had a pre-war population of 30,000. Like even Bakhmut, which it took 6 months, took it 6 months. It was taking Bakhmut for half a year, and back in the summer of 2022, it was taking multiple cities with 100,000 people before the war in a matter of months, like Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, and so on. So, I mean, the pace of advance has very obviously slowed, and the front line, for the most part, is static, with the very minor exception of Avdiivka, which is like a suburb of Donetsk. So, I don't really know.
I agree with you, Anatoly, about this situation, because if we take a look to the real percentage of the, let's say, terrain ground got from the Russian at the beginning, 2022, there is already like minus 50% that was regained from the Ukrainians. And let's say that the front line, it's stable, at least from the last year. There is no big changes except at Vika and Bakhmut. But in my opinion, what we have to see, it's a little bit more complex macroeconomic analysis. I wanted to share with you some data that I normally put in the updates. It's about like the Russian export of crude oil, because for me it's still a data that is very important, because I thought that there was the chance that the Chinese were a real, let's say, playmaker in this thing to get more import from Russia. But the problem is that the Chinese economy is not doing good in the last 2-3 years, and actually it's in a deflection. So they cannot technically import more because they don't need more. They can take it, but not in the same quantity also of gas that the European Union were taking before, about 155 billion cubic meters. So analyzing like the total export, and this is the European Union import from of Russian crude oil, we can see that it's like a total collapse, and the only 3 countries that are still importing from Russia, it's like Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, because they don't have access to the sea, so they're not able to take it. And this is another graph that it's interesting, because it's like the monthly Chinese imports of Russian crude oil. And we can see that from 2021 to now, there is no exchanges. So there is not increase of Russian crude oil imported from China from the pipelines, because the actual capacity of that pipeline, it's like fixed. So another interesting things that I wanted to share and discuss, this was the second part about the weapons, about like the arm export, because there is a very interesting report that went out a few days ago, and I will share it later also in the comments. And in my opinion, more the war is going on, and more there is a problem for the real data of the Russian economy, because what we can see about the GDP is increasing plus 3%, blah blah blah, amazing, but it's about like the lack of internal manpower and the increasing of industrial production for military use, for the war, not for the real economy. And the export, it's interesting. We can see about the order collapsed completely. In 2023, there is like 1/10 of the orders of 2022. And this is like the real orders and transfer of weapons. We can see that there is very few transfer from Russian Federation outside. And this is like another interesting, that is like the order for Russian arm export average, like we can see from 2012. And it's degrading and losing like about 70-80%. The only three countries that order weapons in 2023 from Russian Federation, we were chatting before, it's like India, Iran, and Kyrgyzstan. But the order from India, I didn't know that it was connected to a deal about airplanes, and it's a project that Indians is going to go and prepare, but it's a deal not yet finished. So the only big buyers, it's only Iran. Question about your thought about this thing. Do you think that the performance of the weapons during the war in Ukraine had like an effect of, let's say, weapon export industry of Russian Federation, or because Russia is concentrated in the war and they cannot export weapons at the same level of before?
I think it's obviously both things. I think there'll be less demand for Russian weapons because, because of the underperformance. But this was a long-running trend anyway. I mean, at the end of the day, Russia's weapons, as was its space program, were to a large extent coasting off the massive Soviet legacy in the sphere. And modern Russia has a much smaller research and development complex relative to the Soviet Union, and obviously it was spending a lot more or less on the military as well. So I mean, these outcomes were in any case programmed in the long term. The other thing is that yes, obviously Russia is engaged in an intensive conventional war at the present time. So of course, to the extent that it's actually going to be exporting any weapons, it's generally going to be in return for other weapons. So Iran was the biggest player on that table in that graph you showed, and we know that Russia got Shahed drones from Iran. Yes.
If you can look at this, it's very interesting because the shares of the export of the Russian Federation abroad of, let's say, artillery, engines, and air defense systems are mainly the same. They didn't decrease a lot because they were like a smaller part. The bigger part that have a huge cut in the export were like aircrafts. It is like the blue and missiles that it's light blue. If you can say it's like decreased dramatically. What do you think? Why like especially aircraft are like, let's say, cut from the export? They are not like I don't know. There is a perception of underperformance of these vehicles in like respect the concurrency of US, China, or whatever producers.
I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. Yes, Russia is trying to develop the Su-57, right? But the only examples they've built are prototypes, basically, and it's basically probably this kind of semi-vaporware project that is really never going to come to fruition. So, as I said, Russia seems to have fallen out of the game with respect to the high-end weapon systems for the most part. So, which is sort of natural because its economy is $2 trillion, and at the end of the day, you can't really There's a difference between that and being an economy like the Soviet Union, which was half the size of the US and was spending 12-15% of its GDP on the military, as opposed to Russia today, which before the war was spending 3 or 4% and is now spending 7 or 8%.
And if I can finish posting some slides and then move
yeah, just one more thing though. I don't think it's sort of like a super like arms exports are perhaps interesting from a sectoral perspective, but I don't see how they're important or relevant really to the economy as a whole, because I think we're again speaking about scale. Those numbers you were showing, it's several billions of dollars of exports per year. The size of Russia's exports as a whole, about 500 billion, I believe, much about half of that oil, 80% natural resources. So basically the role of Russia's weapons exports are dwarfed by the like oil, gas, and natural resources.
Yeah, but especially about this export, the problem, in my opinion, is that let's say before the war, let's say 40% of Russian GDP was the export oil and gas, and 60% of the oil and gas export were to European Union. So
Yes.
the main problem, if you cut 60% of your 40% of total GDP, because from December 2023, only 3 countries on 28 are available to import directly oil from Russia, that are Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. And the biggest importers were Germany and Italy for all gas and oil. Technically, it's a huge loss for the economy. Maybe you can, let's say, save it.
I mean, oil is a fungible good, so Russia is not selling to as much to Germany or France, although a lot of it gets re-exported via India. India is actually a major re-exporter of Indian oil, so which is like a way for Western countries to say that, oh, we're not officially importing Russian oil, but we kind of are anyway. But the more general point is that even if Russia can't sell to Germany, France, and so on, it can still sell to other countries on the international market if at a 5 or 10% discount. That's precisely what's happening. But really, the most important factor here really is that the effect of oil prices. And the effect of oil prices are going to depend on the international economic situation. The world economy is growing now. It's recovering quite quickly from the post-coronavirus sort of like mini recession. And so long as that continues, I don't really see Russia having a major problem, budgetary problem. Well, I mean, assuming at least that inflation doesn't get out of control because of the very loose monetary and fiscal policies that is adopted after the beginning of the war, and which actually explains why living standards did not collapse as many people were expecting. But that's a somewhat different topic, though.
But let's say if I wanted to post it, the main thing it's about the revenue, and in this graph you can pretty analyze that the top revenue, it was like about over 1.2 billion for day of export, and now the top it's gaining the Russian Federation, it's about 700 million. So it's for sure it's a huge loss. Also, if you can manage to organize a different way of selling it, let me show in this thing. It's that we can see that the biggest at all supplier for the European Union, it was the Russian Federation, and the top buyer was with over 750 billion for the million per day. And now we can see that also China, India, Turkey, they're increasing the quantity, but as you said, we've discounted the price. So the total revenue, it's however 600-700 millions for day less. So I think it's not a big deal for the economy for a situation that it's going longer and longer with this situation, especially if you have a damage for the, let's say, it was easier to export before. Let's say like this. It's not that everything gets blocked. Russia is still managing to, for example, export crude oil. I checked where are the main ports of export. It's very interesting because Singapore was never in the top export port for the Russian oil, but now yes. So for sure, it's like export for third parties. It's not for Singapore because Singapore is 2 million inhabitants. They don't need so much oil. And last slides about weapons, just to close that. It was about the shares. We can see that there is like in the top seller, there is a reduction of Russia that it's huge. If we can compare 10 years ago and now, we can see that it's the red. It's the second one. So it's the reduction is huge. It's increasing a lot. For example, others that are not included in the top seller before, but we can see now which countries are. So I put it in this chart, like the top 10, let's say, sellers of weapons exporters, excluding United States, that is out of scale. So we can easily see that there is a collapse of the export of the Russian Federation starting from 2013. It's like the orange line. And now, what is the state that it's going up? We can see that it's Germany, also China, also Italy, United Kingdom. It's going down and it's not going up. Israel also, it's in the top seller. An example about Israel that it's interesting. I was in Baku last summer, and very interesting because it's not connected to religious thing. Azerbaijan, it's Muslim Sunni. The first supplier of weapons, it's not Turkey, but it's Israel. So it's if you go if you have a chance to go to Azerbaijan, you will see that in the passport control there is like all the passport and Turkish and Israeli have the priorities. So
yes,
So this thing is
I'm familiar. Israel was supposed supplying drones in particular to Azerbaijan,
but not only also like military technology, about missiles, a lot of things. There is an historically big partnership. Also, I didn't know, but studying about a little bit more the Persian Gulf and whatever before. The Islamic Revolution in Iran, the first supplier of Iran was Israel before the Islamic Revolution. So it's very interesting that in all the Middle East, the religion thing and weapons, it's not connected about alliance. And the same part in Caucasus, the first allied of Armenia, it's Iran. So it's very complicated. Okay, some questions.
So yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I don't think there's anything surprising about this graph. Russia was coasting off the Soviet legacy, BMPs and like the tanks, T-90s and so on. And it was like the aircraft, like the Su-33, Su-27s and MiG-29. So it was selling all of that stuff. But like from the late 2010s, I suppose that a lot of the existing customers either bought or they had to buy. Algeria in particular. I mean, Algeria was a very big importer of Russian weapons. I mean, but there's a limit to how much a country of 40 million people can import. So they sort of finished their orders and new ones didn't come in, and that was it.
No, it's very interesting also about China, that was the biggest importer, for example, of Russian
China is obvious though, because their military industry was lagging 10 years ago and earlier, but now Chinese hardware is actually more modern than what Russia produces, so they've modernized, which again doesn't make it makes sense in the context of it being now the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity. So of course it can afford to spend a lot more on research and development. So yes, it got like the Russian hardware. Then it like the last sort of like major challenge that China had was aircraft engines, but they seem to have mostly solved that over the past 2 years as well. So there's literally nothing else that they can really have to buy from Russia. Like Russian fighters don't have AISA radars. China does as of several years ago. So like in terms of radar, avionics, and so on, Chinese fighters are just more advanced than what Russia produces these days, from what I understand. So what's the point of importing from Russia?
I have a last question from the public, just to finish the stream. So, okay. In anticipation of the Trump victory, Putin elects himself as an European counterpart because he's the only one with nukes, because Le Pen doesn't disgust him, because he's so well placed in Africa to exert pressure, because this way also guarantees himself on Syria. So what do you think about what could happen after like a 5 minute answer, just to close? What could be the effect of the election in USA, and also a little bit about the election that we will have in June, a European election, because just to make a spoiler, in this election could be a scenario that could be the first time with a center-right parliament majority. And actually, in European Union, we have like a right, left, center, like a majority. It's called Ursula, everybody together. But in this time, that there will be a chance that the right parties will be a majority for the first time. So, what do you think that these two main elections, European Union and US, can change in this geopolitical scenario?
I don't think it's extremely relevant because to begin with, Trump, I know that a lot of like pro-Putin Russians fantasize about Trump coming to power and stopping all the aid supplies to Ukraine. But in reality, if you actually look at the record, Trump was the person who started supplying weapons to Ukraine in the first place. Obama did not do that. That began with Trump. And in general, his foreign policy towards Russia was like actually pretty hawkish relative to Obama. And I think that if Trump does get elected, what I soon expect is a nasty surprise, especially in light of the fact that there's going to be a rerun of Russiagate if Trump does get elected, like Putin puppet, but times 10x, in my opinion. And the easiest way to address those issues would be to actually simply increase aid to Ukraine, as opposed to today when the Republicans are sort of playing hardball on Ukraine aid because they want to tie it to immigration and Israel and so on. But if they're actually in power, they would have no actual incentives to do that. I'm, as regards Europeans, I mean, I sort of like have a similar viewpoint. I don't think like the aid fundamentally depends on the specifics of the parties in power. I will point out that Meloni, Italy's leader, is very anti-Putin, and so again, the sort of like simple equivalence that right wing equals more favorable or acquiescent to Russia's like misadventures in Ukraine. I don't think that's the correct prism through which to look at things.
So, perfect. Thank you for your answer. If there is anybody else that want to put any question or answer about our discussion with Anatoly, please put to the comments. And hope to see you live soon, maybe in Tuscany, maybe in Panama. Let's see.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, and please subscribe to the channels of Anatoly that you will find in the description, and see you soon.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.